So, hello listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Parks Trust and Open University podcast. This is another episode in our series about how the great outdoors can help us to age well. I am joined again by Dr. Jitka Vseteckova from the Open University, and today we have two special guests, Dr. Yoseph Araya, who is a senior lecturer in Ecology and Environmental Sciences, and Dr. Helen Joannidi, who is an independent clinical psychologist. Welcome everyone. My name is Ellie Broad and I'm a Community Engagement Officer with the Parks Trust. In today's podcast, we will be exploring our sense of self in ageing, mindfulness and nature. We hope that by coming together from all of our different professions, we can provide some insight into what happens as we age and how we can manage our feelings around it. So Jitka, can you tell us a little about what your work focuses on?
Hello, Ellie. Thank you very much. Great to be here. So as we all know, also from our previous podcasts and articles, we start aging the moment we're born, and the way aging affects us depends a lot on decisions we have been making over our lifespan. So our decisions, or as we sometimes call them, lifestyle choices, play an important part in our lives, especially as we age. You probably also know that the basic metabolism slows down naturally as we age. So the basic metabolism is usually defined as the rate at which the body uses energy while it's at rest to maintain vital functions such as breathing, blood circulation, digesting food, and keeping warm, or thermoregulation, in other words. It can also be taken as an estimate for minimum number of calories a person needs to burn to sustain their basic life functions during a 24-hour period of rest. So usually the slowed basic metabolism is combined as we age, as we grow older, with age-related changes on our cardiovascular system. So this encompasses heart, veins, arteries, circulation of blood, our immune system, which is how our body protects itself from infection and how it's supported to recover after illnesses and injuries, our respiratory system, hormonal changes that happen with aging, changes on musculoskeletal system that sometimes include bone thinning, losing muscles, weaker joints or tendons, and sometimes decreased flexibility are all natural kind of changes that we usually see while aging. All these naturally occurring age-related changes mean that our organs and functions may start declining. So this decline happens at different speed for different organs within each individual. And for this reason, aging of individuals as well as aging of populations is very difficult to predict. In the previous podcasts and Open Learn articles, we talked already a lot about how aging affects our brain and our memory, and these are available via the Open University and Parks Trust podcast YouTube channel. The Open University Parks Trust podcast YouTube channel. But today we're here to learn more about the sense of self. What is sense of self, and why is it important to preserve, and how can we go about it? So Helen, please come on in and do tell us more.
Thanks very much, Jitka. I'm Dr. Helen Joannidi, and I've been interested in the idea and concept of the self and how this relates to our mental well-being for many years. And my perspective about preserving a sense of self comes from having worked as a clinical psychologist in the NHS for 15 years. And for the last 10 of those, or thereabouts, it's been with older people using mostly mindfulness-based therapies. Over the years, I've worked with many people who've been through difficult experiences and for whom this has left them feeling depleted, not just in energy and joy, but also in a deeper sense of who they are, as if they've lost themselves through these experiences. Our sense of self is crucial in many ways to our well-being. Or to put it another way, we can suffer when we don't feel like our authentic selves. This is something that actually has been addressed by multiple theories and therapies, but it's perhaps not something that's discussed so much in the public domain as opposed to concepts such as depression and anxiety. There are numerous theories on the self, Existentialism, for example, seeks to explore what it means to be human and asks, who are we, or who am I? Descartes famously declared, I think, therefore I am, meaning that being a self-conscious thinking being is what makes us who we are. Therefore, the I in who am I is a thinking human being. Jung saw the self as a whole, encompassing the conscious, the unconscious, and the ego. In more practical terms, our sense of self is a concept that can be thought of as made up of our upbringing, our culture, our language, our experiences, our relationships, our body, our mind, our achievements, and crucially, our beliefs and values. Older age can sometimes be a challenging time for maintaining a full sense of self, as there can be so much change in this period of our lives, and some of which can be associated with loss. People in later life are often retiring from work, or may have already retired from work. For many people, their work may have provided them with a sense of pride or value, and it can have been something by which people feel defined, at least in part, for most of their adult life. So with this loss of work role may come not only a sense of freedom, but sometimes a sense of isolation or lack of structure, a hole that used to be filled by work colleagues, and work-based events. Work could not only be something that people use to define themselves, but can provide a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And adjusting to the loss of this can take time and can shake us existentially. During later life, there may also be physical difficulties that can limit what people are able to do, so that they may have to give up activities that they once loved. Perhaps they're no longer able to play tennis or knit anymore. And if these are lifelong loved activities, this can also bring with it a challenge to who they are without them. Who am I then without my work, my routines, without my beloved pastimes? If we begin to lose skills through cognitive difficulties, such as those associated with dementia, then this can have an even more profound effect on our sense of self, as we have to relearn to live without being able to rely on memory or being able to always find the words to say when we need them. If we're being supported by loved ones, we may also feel that our role in life has changed, or their role has. Or perhaps we've lost loved ones and are now learning to live without them, with all the difficulty that brings. So who are we now? And how can we boost our sense of self, especially when living with dementia or caring for someone who does? There are some practical ways in which we can help ourselves come back to our sense of self if we're living through the difficulty of dementia or caring for a loved one with dementia. Firstly, it's really important to focus on small positives and be aware of what is still possible. This can be a huge challenge when we feel as though many things have been taken away, but it's about finding things that we can still share. Perhaps we still laugh at the same jokes, or we can watch a beloved television series together. Related to this is the idea of nostalgia, which is reminiscing about positive events and achievements in one's own life. This can also be done together with loved ones and may take the form of a photo album, remembered stories, or using treasured objects to reminisce. Using nostalgia in this way has been shown to help boost self-esteem and self-worth in people with dementia, as a way of reminding people who they are by remembering the life that they've lived. Using nostalgic music, whether listening together or singing, can be an especially powerful way of reminiscing and preserving a sense of what has been, and therefore a reminder of who we are. It's also important to focus on relationships and social support. Sometimes when we forget who we are, others can remind us of just what we have achieved, what special times we've had, who we've helped in the past, and times when we've laughed together. If a person with dementia can no longer tell stories or jokes for themselves, then having others do this for them, or having video or audio recordings of family members doing this, can be helpful instead. Preserving humour where we can is important, as humour is a universal human experience from childhood until our very last days. If we can find a way to laugh, then we can connect with this part of ourselves. If we're able to write our thoughts and feelings down, such as in a journal, or perhaps speak them onto a recording device, this can also help us to understand ourselves and our experiences and to make sense of what we're going through. And this can often help us to be clearer about what is important to us, helping us to connect with our beliefs and values. One helpful idea from acceptance and commitment therapy is the idea that we can rediscover our values in our pain. For example, if we feel sad because we feel isolated, this shows that we value connectedness with others. If we feel unhappy because we feel useless, this shows that we place value on being of use to others. By looking at what's causing our distress, we can highlight what our beliefs and values may be and see if it's possible to move towards a way to live in accordance with these values. However, sometimes even these practical steps may not be possible, and we may be left with a sense that there's nothing more that we can do, that we're losing ourselves to the dementia or to the caring role, and that we have no or little control over this process. How then do we care for ourselves and help ourselves to preserve a sense of who we are and a sense of peace within this? This is where I believe using a mindfulness perspective can be helpful, and we can use time in nature to aid this process. From a mindfulness perspective, spending time in nature is a good way to be able to appreciate being in the moment, which is one of the foundations of being able to cope with change, especially challenging changes that might erode our sense of self. When our mind remains focused on the present, it stops us from ruminating about the past, longing for or wishing for moments that have already been, and using up large amounts of the precious time we have left by wishing things were still as they were. Another common mental trap can be worrying about the future, especially when our future is uncertain. Worrying won't help or change anything, but we can again use up precious time creating future worst-case scenarios in our head instead of living the life that we have right now. So being present in our minds, in the here and now, is an antidote to that. We can use our senses when we're out in nature. What can we hear around us, such as leaves rustling or birds singing? What can we feel, like the wind on our face or mittens on our hands? What can we see, smell, taste? Perhaps we're drinking a cup of coffee in the park and we can really focus on how that tastes for a moment. If we can really slow down and notice the petals of a flower, the slow movement of a beetle, we can be reminded to return to this moment, here and now, and really be present in our lives. So often, we may be on automatic pilot and drift through life without awareness. We can be walking in beautiful surroundings, but only thinking about what we have to do later this afternoon. Taking time to bring awareness to what's around us can bring us a better quality of life, reduce stress and improve well-being. It can also give us permission to just be, rather than feel we always need to be achieving something. Instead of asking, what can I do? We can ask, how can I come back to myself? How can I be present in each moment? Being in nature is also a reminder of the impermanence of all things, as we, for example, see the seasons change and notice different weather from day to day. An acceptance of the impermanence of all things is also central to be able to hold a sense of self, as we realise that many parts of us can change, such as our body, our hair colour, our job, our home, and yet there is something permanent that remains, that transcends the changes that occur. Watching a tree go through cycles of bud, leaves, flowers or fruit, then losing leaves again, can be a metaphor for the part of us that remains whilst things around us change. We, like the tree, can be buffeted by the weather of our lives. Things can change around us and to us, but we can be rooted in the deepest, innermost parts of ourselves that endure. Impermanence teaches us that every day is different and that actually everything in life is changing all the time. Our body largely replaces all of its cells within 7 to 10 years. Our lungs are constantly breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. Our digestive system is extracting nutrients from food to be circulated throughout our cells. We are in a constant state of change. Nature can remind us to embrace this rather than to fight against it, to go through cycles of change, like the tree does.
Yes, indeed. Following Helen's observation about natural spaces, there have been many studies where focusing on nature has been related to boost feeling of well-being and belonging to the environment. where, for example, studies by Orr say that nature could be used to stimulate reminiscence of people and places and to evoke past sensory experiences so as to enrich everyday life and maintain a sense of self. Now, consider a regular routine of going for a walk, often in a beautiful or relaxing natural space. This could enable people to engage with their environment, for example, to feel the air, the sun, the shade contrasts, noticing wildlife, and vegetation with seasonality being a key element. So what happens is when people are experiencing this and also using, like, for example, technology to record, take a photo, or put their observation in terms of a prose or a poem, and maybe discuss with other walkers their observations. So they may talk about birds they see or moving in the nest. So all this observation has itself a life-affirming effect and appreciating change. Now, there is also a sensory aspect that is stimulating by being outdoors and feeling interaction, whether it is walking on the soil or grass or brushing aside vegetation or looking at leaves, for example, or the less observed ones like the smell of honeysuckle, wild garlic. It just fosters a sense of being. And this has been associated with that it helps mental health by reducing anxiety and improve concentration by enabling focus on the subtle changes that arise in one's environment. Of course, there are many physiological benefits of exercise. For example, the exertion in terms of physical fitness, cardiovascular health, and also strengthening the muscles and well-being as well. So there have been many examples and people taking photos and demonstrations that detail of what is changing in nature. Of course, this can lead into a sense of acceptance and mindfulness, which my colleague Helen will follow on.
Another central theme in mindfulness is that of acceptance. This can sometimes be wrongly interpreted as a passive state of giving up. However, acceptance can be very powerful in challenging times. Acceptance can perhaps be better thought of as acknowledgement, a way of recognising and turning towards difficulty rather than ignoring or pushing it away. If we're struggling with something such as physical or mental pain or distress, loss or sadness, it can be tempting to keep ourselves busy, put on a brave face, then pretend that the feelings aren't there. This can be a helpful sticking plaster for a short time. However, we only ever deal with difficulty by processing those feelings, and this is where the first step is accepting that those feelings exist. We may struggle with this, but we don't have to fight it. When we look to the natural world, creatures in nature certainly struggle. It's a difficult life to have to arise every morning and hunt for food, not knowing whether today will be successful. It can be miserable to have to be out in the rain and soaked through, but an animal won't dwell on this experience. As humans, our minds allow us to replay difficult things and torture ourselves with them again and again, whereas an animal that's been soaked through by a shower or frightened by a loud noise will shake off this experience and move on, accepting life as it is. The important part of acceptance is having the wisdom to know what we can and cannot change, and to use our energy only for the former. The squirrel will spend time gathering nuts for winter and preparing, but once winter comes, the squirrel won't complain about the weather as if they could change it. They accept that this is something that's out of their control. The squirrel doesn't try to be anything other than the squirrel, and remains at all times its essential self. In allowing that life brings us things we cannot change, we can save our energies for those things that we can. And in this way, we can empower ourselves by being reminded what it is that we still have choice and control over, however small that may be. Finally, a mindfulness perspective takes a stance of non-judgment and compassion. Instead of judging ourselves or being critical, in mindfulness we bring a warm smile to our mistakes, a a chuckle to our problems and difficulties. We learn to be our own best friend. As humans, we're used to labelling and judging things, and indeed this is an important skill that helps us, for example when we're young, to learn the words for objects. But self-judgment especially can lead to unhelpful labels such as useless, pointless, helpless. This can erode our sense of self by creating a negative narrative about ourselves. And it's a curious human trait that often the more we're suffering and struggling, the more we do this. The antidote to this is to cultivate a sense of compassion for ourselves, which is often much more difficult than doing so for others. Sometimes people cringe at this idea as if there's something that comes from an inflated ego, but in fact true self-compassion comes from a deep, wise place, the same part of us that endures through change. This is not a place of childish ego, but a place of wise, loving and caring, as we would have for a child, and which is in each of us. Self-compassion is to have unconditional regard for ourselves. Again, we can see this in nature. A wild bird cares for itself unconditionally. It doesn't care for itself only if its nest is perfect. It doesn't have to earn the right to relax and preen its feathers. Wild birds know that times of relaxation and self-care are actually vital to survival. As humans, we may think of self-care as a luxury or something to be earned, but looking to nature can show us that this is not the case. We deserve to be who we are, exactly as we are, however we are right now, and this is enough. Mindful observation of the bird gives us permission to allow ourselves to be exactly who we are, and what could be better for our sense of self than this? In this way, being in nature and the mindfulness skills it can teach us can help us preserve a sense of self in an ever-changing world, and especially during difficult times that may come with ageing and with the challenges of dementia.
It's wonderful to know that it's okay to take some time for ourselves, to just be present and enjoy the nature that is around us. Something as simple as a walk around your local park could be the perfect opportunity to start practicing this mindfulness that Helen has just described. We're very lucky here in Milton Keynes to have so many parks within the city, and each of them has a unique character, providing ample opportunity to immerse yourself in your surroundings, or even to visit your favourite park time and again to watch the wildlife and the seasons change. Here in the Parks Trust, we're working hard to make our parks and green spaces as accessible as possible. A great way to visit our parks for the first time is on one of our discovery strolls, which are gentle guided walks where everyone is welcome. And they're particularly suited to people who are less mobile. Or perhaps you're interested in learning more about local nature. We offer a whole range of events and activities across the year. So check out our website at www.theparkstrust.com to see what's on offer. You can also phone our office on 01908 233 600 to have a friendly chat and to learn more about your parks. Even if you're not from Milton Keynes, there are a whole host of parks and green spaces out there just waiting for you to visit. So why not venture out and see what you discover?